Section 2 of A Rip van Winkle of the Kalahari, 7 Tales of Southwest Africa by Frederick Carruthers Cornell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune. The Blue Diamond. Diamonds first brought me to this country, a small glass vial full of them, in the hands of an old sailor who had been shipwrecked on the southwest African coast, somewhere in the vicinity of Cape Cross, and who had spent many months wandering with the bushmen who found him, before he eventually worked his way back safely to Walfish Bay. Here one of the rare whalers that occasionally called at that little-known spot eventually picked him up, and he at length got back to Liverpool with nothing but his tiny packet of little bright stones to show for all his months of hardship among the bushmen. The ignorant whalers had laughed at his assertion that the little crystals were of any value, as at that time diamonds were undreamed of in South Africa, for all this was long, long ago. Chance threw me in the old man's way, and a small service I was able to render him led to his showing me the stones. He had been in Brazil and had seen rough diamonds there, and I too, who had also dug in the fields of Minas Gerais, saw at once that he was right. They were diamonds. I had money, but I wanted more, for there was a girl for whom I had sworn to make a fortune, and who in turn had sworn to wait for me. Poor girl! She little knew how long that wait would be, or the kind of wreck that would return to her at last. And even as I poured the little glittering cascade of diamonds that old Anderson had found from one hand to the other, my mind was made up. "Anderson," I said, "come out with me to Africa again, man. We can make ourselves rich men. Of course, there must be more where these came from." "More?" said the hard-bitten old seaman, who was as brown and withered as the bushmen he had lived amongst so long. "More, is it? Why, sir, there's bushels of them in a valley as I knows of out there. So many that I couldn't believe myself that they was diamonds, so I only brought a few. But there they can stay for me. No more bushmen for me, thank'ee. They'd put a poisoned arrow through me if ever they saw me again. But if you want to go, well and good. I'll tell you where to find the diamonds." And the upshot was that I sailed for the Cape a week later, and a few months afterwards I landed at Walfish Bay, from whence I intended trekking north in search of the Golconda old Anderson had described to me. At that time, with the exception of a few traders, hunters, and missionaries near the coast, the country was uninhabited by white men. Moreover, it was in a state of turmoil. From the northeast, a powerful Bantu race, the Damaras, or over Herero as they term themselves, had been gradually spreading over their lands south and west, and had just come in contact with the Namaquas, a Hottentot race who had come from the south. The result had been a series of bloody native wars, in which neither race could for long claim decided advantage. Meanwhile the aboriginal bushmen of the country had been almost exterminated, scattered tribes of them only remaining in the most inaccessible parts of the country. It was towards these wild people that my path lay, and the few settlers I met warned me that my trip was likely to be a dangerous one. "And you have nothing to gain," they pointed out. "These bushmen have no cattle, no ivory, nothing. They are but vermin, and a poisoned arrow is all you are likely to get from them." But, secure in my knowledge of the riches awaiting me, I was not to be deterred, and there came a day when my wagon, loaded with a goodly stock of trade goods, trekked from the sands of Walfish Bay towards the then unknown country lying to the north. Rain had fallen, and I found the trek by no means as difficult as I had expected, for I had good native guides, and for a time all went well. But gradually the long sandy stretches were left behind, and the country became extremely difficult. On all sides rose vast tabletop mountains with almost perpendicular sides, and the wide valleys between them gradually narrowed till they became nothing but deep, narrow, precipitous gorges, impassable for a wagon. Deep we penetrated into this tangle of mountains, endeavouring in vain to find a way through in the direction I believed the valley to lie, and at length it became evident that to proceed farther with the wagon was out of the question. Here, therefore, in a well-wooded kloof with an abundance of water, I made my central camp, and from it I proceeded to explore the country farther north. By this time the wild bushmen, who had hitherto fled at our approach, had gained confidence, and came freely to the camp, and I had guides in plenty. For a time their extraordinary click language was utterly beyond my comprehension, but at length I learnt enough of it to make them understand what I wished to find. But search as I would, I could never find the spot. Valley after valley they took me to, krans after krans, and kloof after kloof. I scrambled through and searched, but all in vain. Mineral wealth I found everywhere, copper and tin in abundance, and in one deep valley rich nuggets of gold, but still the diamonds evaded me. Nor did I ever find them, though I am sure that Anderson's tale was true, and that somewhere in those mountains lie diamonds galore. It may be that they are now buried deep in the sand, for at times the wind blows with incredible force, and in the terrific sandstorms huge dunes are lifted and swept across the country, and it may well be that the deep valley of his day is now filled to the level of its walls. Sick and disheartened, I determined at last to offer a big reward to any of the guides who should bring in a diamond to me, and calling them all together, I made them understand as much, at the same time showing one of the little diamonds that Anderson had given me. A trade musket with powder and shot was to be the reward, and as this was a prize beyond the dreams of these poor bushmen, there was a general exodus from the camp in search of the bright stones. From their excited exclamations when I showed them the diamond, I gathered that they had all seen such stones, and I cheered myself with the hope that at last I should be rewarded for all my hardships. But alas, they brought in bright stones, truly bright stones in abundance, but quartz crystals chiefly, bright, clear, and sparkling, but of course utterly valueless, and though I sent them out again and again, they brought nothing in of any value. Amongst my boys who had followed me from Walfish Bay was one Inyati who was much attached to me, and who had become a sort of body servant to me. He was a fine upstanding chap, who held himself absolutely aloof from the Griquas and Hottentots that formed the bulk of my paid followers, and to whose oblique eyes and peppercorn wool his expressive orbs and shock of crinkled hair formed an agreeable contrast. As for the bushmen, Inyati treated them, and looked upon them, absolutely as dogs. He was a good game sporer, and I had taught him to shoot, and so intelligent was he that I had taken a great interest in him, and had learned to talk to him in his own tongue, a sonorous, expressive language, entirely different to the peculiar click of the local natives. I knew that his dearest wish was to possess a gun of his own, and fully expected that he too would wish to join in the search that might lead to his gaining one. But though he had examined the stones I had shown far more intently than any of them, he made no effort to leave the camp. Day after day he attended to my simple wants, spending all his spare time in polishing my weapons, a work he absolutely loved, and crooning interminable songs in a low monotone. One day, when the bushmen had again trooped off on their fruitless search, I called Inyati and told him to make certain preparations, as, should they again bring in nothing, I would strike camp and return to Walfish Bay, and then I asked him out of curiosity why he had not tried to earn the gun. "Master," said he, scraping away at the hollow shin bone of a buck that served him as a pipe, as a broad hint that his tobacco was finished, "I know not the land of these dogs of Bushmen. If it were in my own land now, but that is far away." I laughed, for by his manner of saying it he conveyed the impression that there he could pick out diamonds under every bush. "Dogs they may be, Inyati," I answered him, "but they are dogs with keen eyes, and yet they cannot find the stones I seek, and that I know too are not far away." He stood, nodding gravely at my words, and still fidgeting with his bone pipe, a splendid figure of a man, nude except for his leopard skin loincloth, his skin clear and glossy, of a golden brown, for he was no darker than, but entirely different from, the yellow Hottentots. "Master," said he, "what magic will my master make with the little bright stones, should he find them?" "No magic, Inyati," said I, "but in my country, across the great water, these things are worth many muskets, cattle, ay, and even wives." "That may be, my master," he replied, "but magic they are, and hide themselves when dogs such as these Bushmen search for them. Still, master, we will wait and see what they bring to-night, though well I know that they will come back with empty hands, as empty as is this my pipe." I could not help laughing at the way in which he had brought the subject of his finished tobacco to my notice, and in a fit of unwonted generosity I not only gave him a span of tobacco, but also a cheap pipe from my trade goods. Poor chap, it was the first he had ever had, for his shin bone had served him hitherto, and his delight was unmistakable. An hour later I saw him still at his everlasting polishing, and with the new pipe in full blast, and now he was crooning not only its praises but my own. Half his improvised song was unintelligible to me, but I understood enough to learn that when the dogs of Bushmen had failed, he, Inyati, the snake, would lead me to a land where there were magic stones in abundance, and by means of which, I gathered, we should both obtain wives galore. I laughed at the poor chap's foolish bombast, as I thought it, but I have often wondered since whether the gift of that cheap pipe did not, after all, alter the whole of my life. For that evening, sure enough, the Bushmen again returned empty-handed, and acting on my former resolve, I called my own followers together and told them to make ready to return to Walfish Bay. Later, as I sat in my tent writing up my diary by the light of a feeble candle, and with the gloomiest of thoughts for company, I heard Inyati's voice outside. "Master," he said, in a low tone, but little above a whisper, "the dogs are full of meat and sleeping, and there is that which I would show thee." Without feeling much interest in what he might have got, I bade him enter, and he stood before me in the dim light of my tallow candle. Fumbling in his leopard skin, he drew forth a little tortoise shell, such as the Hottentot women use for holding the hare's foot, ochre, buku leaves, and other mysteries of their toilet. I had often seen him with it, and had chaffed him about carrying it before, and he evidently anticipated something of the kind again. "Nay, master," he said, before I could speak, "true as thou sayest, it is a woman's box, and a woman gave it me, but the box is naught. This is what I would show my master." He shook something from the little box into the palm of his hand, clenched it, and with a dramatic gesture thrust it close to the dim light and threw his fingers wide. There, glittering in the yellow palm, flashing and scintillating with every movement, and looking as though the light it gathered and reflected really burnt in its liquid depths, lay the most marvellous diamond I had ever beheld. The size of a small walnut, flawless, blue-tinted, and of wondrous lustre and beauty. Its many facets were as brilliantly polished as though fresh from the hands of the cutter, though it was a rough stone, untouched except by nature. I was too stunned to speak or do anything but clutch it and gloat over it and mutter, "Where? Where?" End of section 2. Recording by Leanne Fortune, South Africa.